What's the deal, man? Yeah.
Anything exciting happen?
Nothing done.
Same, yeah. Just trying to make.
But. That's not a big deal. I'm honest.
Or tonight, then. Oh, I told you to take the plate. Yeah. Sunday. Night. It's really late on Sunday. So, not then, okay. It's really Wednesday too. I can take you. I have nothing on with error on Thursday, so I'll let you know. Thank you. Yeah.
A little bit worried that I like, there's no kind of like too much to wear.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but you can, it'll be good.
You know, oh, I think you were the one who asked me this, like, yeah, your parents, like.
Yeah, haven't even still, assuming it's a no at this point.
All three. I didn't really want to go. Definitely not healthy. And then my parents were like, oh, we already booked the hotel. I'm like, fine, whatever.
Yeah, I feel like I'm like the first two, like, no.
Right, yeah, yeah. At least it's not like all of the same.
What's it usually look like around here? People sit here?
We had our like performance class.
Well, like, no. But I'm like, so.
I do have some, but that'll be short.
That's nice. Oh, that's great. What class is that?
It's the 494.
Oh.
That's what I think.
I always have like, oh, yeah. Yeah.
I don't have lots of.
Yeah, so I'm thinking you have to like,
We're talking good, it's pretty cool, finish it off like an hour.
yeah, so it's like
Yeah,
very much
that's-
like empty plate.
Yeah.
And so satisfying.
we throw premises in the code and try to figure out what it is. And, yeah, it's a little bit of a mess.
Okay, so basically they go through cut points. And they give you check and you play or figure out if it's
I mean,
like true.
this
false.
is the TA's done.
And then they basically do like machine learning.
I think it's
So
good.
traits.
I think it's good.
Yeah, so there's like 6,000 lines of training data and then like 6,000 lines of training data. And like our so like we have to go and translate all the text, like analyze the text. So it takes like a minute or each data learn how to 6,000 lines.
Now, right or wrong?
It's like like doing the math. It's like so you know, you're running two sets. My laptop. I'm just like, I'm like, I'm going to check on it. Do next year, okay? It's like, as long as you like update your set, like, because like. Yeah, so like. It's like.
How about Joshua Parker?
I was like, if it fails, then like, it's not a fault.
Those some boiling oil.
Yeah, self answers.
I think I hear for the rest of the background noises.
Okay.
Okay, so today would be the last of the Bayes network inference, and then next class we will shift to learning Bayes networks, which is basically statistical learning. But they're all connected, but I think I've been kind of forward foreshadowing. For example, I mentioned naive Bayes classifier, which is like one of the most useful things that you can use in your interviews, etc. And naive Bayes classifier is nothing but a network of the type class causes attributes. So if you have your examples, training examples defined in terms of some attributes and the values, and then the y, that's the x, and then the y is the class, then you assume that the class causes attributes. That's the topology. Then once you know the topology, it turns out you can compute the CPTs. And once you have the CPTs, given a new training example, even one which is only partially described, that means only some of its attributes values are known, you can still compute the posterior on the class. And that's basically what naive Bayes classifiers do. Okay, and it's like probably almost anticlimactic even to call that a learning technique, but it's actually extremely useful in many, many cases, just like logistic regression. In fact, there is an interesting connection between logistic regression and naive Bayes classifier. This one is generative. That means it's trying to actually learn PXY. And this one is discriminative in the sense it only learns PY given X. That's the difference between logistic regression and naive Bayes classifier. We'll come to that again. But anyway, that's basically, so today we are kind of going to look at the quick review of the inference in Bayes nets that you guys already looked at. I hope that by now everybody has had a chance to look at these videos, because in fact that was supposed to be watched over the weekend. And I also said, if you haven't done it, do it again. So if there are any questions, that would be, when I'm going quickly through those slides, if there are questions, that would be a time to stop me. Okay, So, and then I'll talk a little bit about independence in Bayes networks, which is actually important. It's, it's a semantics of Bayes networks. And then we'll also talk about causality in Bayes networks. Before I go forward, are there any questions? I believe the this midterm 2 will be released tomorrow, right? And then it will be due on Monday. Okay. Okay. So one thing that I want to start the beginning itself is to say that, remember one of the things that you were interested in, the simplest case for probability distributions the simplest case for probability distributions, you'll say that probability, we talked about this, probability, joint probability distribution normally requires 2 power n minus 1 numbers. If n is the number of Boolean random variables. Right, that means they can take true or false, but they take that value randomly. Okay, and then the best, this is the maximum worst case number. They're all 2 power n minus 1 numbers that are all independent. Essentially, you can't, if I tell you, only when I tell you 2 power n minus 1 numbers can you guess the next one. If I stop after giving less than those many numbers, you can't guess the rest of the numbers because they're all different. Okay. On the other hand, if you happen to assume that variables are independent, are completely independent. No, so this would be the Bayes network that is completely connected DAG. DAG means directed acyclic graph. Completely connected means there can't be cycles in the thing, right? We have looked at that. So that would be the worst case scenario. Assuming they're independent, you will essentially be a network like this, right? And in this case, you can get these 2 power n minus 1 numbers with just n numbers. Right? Because you will say P of x1 to xn is P of x1 times P of x2 times P of xn. Right? This is basically called factorization. That means the joint distribution got factorized into these pieces, these n pieces. If you multiply these n pieces, you'll get the joint distribution. Okay, and so that also means that you got away without having to give 2 power n minus 1 numbers. You just give n numbers and you're able to construct from them 2 power n minus 1 numbers. There's a humongous redundancy because of the independence. Right? Okay, so this you understand that in fact, the way probability inference becomes easy is by having joint be factorizable. Do you understand what I'm saying? So the worst case scenario joint distribution where there in fact you will need all 2 power n minus 1 numbers, that's like a prime number. It has no factors. This is the highly composite number. It has exactly n factors and you can essentially multiply these n numbers to get any entry. And in between are the normal Bayes networks, which is less than full DAG. But, and in a way, it is useful to realize that, I mean, intuitively you think that these middle Bayes networks, they are actually having, so here this one has a one factor because this has no factors. The full joint is itself. Here, the full joint is composed of n small probability distributions that you multiply, you'll get the full joint. The normal in between Bayes networks, they're essentially factorizing with maybe not n factors, but less than n factors. Do you understand that? I want you to get that. That is the intuition you have. I want to kind of show you what we mean by factors in that particular case. In fact, what we mean by factors is exactly this, that joint distribution got multiplied. Except here, it looks as if you understand what you're doing because you're just multiplying single probabilities. But what we do in this kind of a scenario, if you have A, B, C, right? The joint distribution here can be written as P of A times P of B given A times P of C given A. Do people all understand this? Right? So I actually factorize the joint distribution into three factors. Okay. And what do these factors look like and what do you mean by multiplying them? In general, basically for individual probabilities, you will actually multiply the conditional probabilities. So for example, in this case, suppose A prior probability is 0.7, B given A is 0.3, B given not A is 0.8, C given A is 0.45, C given not A is 0.6. If I ask you, what is the probability of A not B not C? Right, I can ask that, okay? That would be, that means A equal to true, B is equal to false, C equals to false, okay? That will be P of A, which is 0.7, times P of not B given A. Not B given A is 1 minus 0.3. Do people see that? Okay, and then not C given A. Not C given A is 1 minus 0.45. So that's your number. So individual probabilities will just be multiplication of these numbers. But actually you can think of the entire joint distribution as a table, as a nice little matrix. And this matrix is factorized into other matrices and they are being multiplied. That's the intuition you want to get. It's almost right, except that it's not actual matrix multiplication. It is what's called join operation. And those of you who have done databases, how many of you have done database? Yeah. So database join operation. Okay. Some of you at least know matrix multiplication, right? So if you say multiply matrices, you'll think of normal matrix multiplication. But here, when you multiply distributions, you essentially do join the multiplication. So I want to show you that, just so that even it's sort of the background of the semantics of Bayes networks, essentially. Okay, so if I want to write these, right? So essentially, I can write these numbers as actually matrices, right? This is basically the same as this. A is 0.7, not A is 0.3, AB 0.3, A not B 0.7, not A B 0.8, not A not B 0.2, etc. You guys get this? I just wrote this in a different form. So this now looks like a database table. Okay, now I can start multiplying. Suppose I know that PABC is PA times PBA times PCA. So now if I want to multiply P of A times P of BA, that is P of A is this matrix, and if P of B given A is this other matrix. The way I multiply it is by doing join. You see what I'm saying? If there is a common, so A and B given A, basically A is the common one. Right? So what I will do is I'll essentially write this to be A. So basically this is AB will be A and AB 0.7 times 0.3. Similarly, A not B is A is 0.7 times 0.7. Similarly, not A, not B not AB is 0.3 times 0.8 and not A not B is 0.7. Do people see this? It's a very simple join operation. When I multiplied PA times PBA, I get this matrix. This is actually, in our case, it turns out to be the joint of PBA. But all the matrices look at the same exact form, essentially. So now I will need to multiply it with this matrix, PC given A, to get the overall joint. So if I multiply this matrix by this matrix, I'll get a much bigger matrix. That is the full joint. And that joint basically says ABC is that number, AB not C is that number, etc. And so what you are essentially done is, instead of you, in fact, for a normal probability distribution over 3 variables, you could have put any set of 8 numbers here such that they add up to 1. Any set of 8 numbers between 0 and 1 that add up to 1 would be a joint distribution. But this particular joint distribution, while it is actually adding up to 1, it also has this factorizability. It is actually the same as multiplying this by that. You understand this? So that's essentially what is happening. You are actually a normal joint distribution, like the prime joint distribution, if you think in terms of prime number analogies, wouldn't have any factors. That would correspond to a Bayes network, essentially that is completely connected. Yes.
Sorry, this might be because I came in late, but are the propositions part of the matrix?
What?
Are the propositions part of the matrix?
Yeah, basically you write it that way so that we can keep track of, because think of it as database tables. Because you're joining, the multiplication of the tables is the join multiplication.
Is each proposition its own cell? Do you want to anything about the table?
No, I mean, basically these are the things, right? So if we went from here to here, so this is your network. This is the way you think about it, but you can write it, complete, like a more elaborate form. Yes.
If you update the probability of any of the states, do you recompute the entire thing or do you just modify the time?
No, again, first of all, those are in here, basically, this is the entire network. This is the joint distribution. There is no such thing actually as updating in the current scenario. In fact, to talk about updating, such as, for example, you want to see if you change the CPT, then it's a different probability distribution. Okay, the only thing you actually do during inference is, with respect to this joint distribution, you ask all sorts of questions. You ask, what's the probability of A given B and not C? Or what's the probability of C given B and not A? Or what's the probability of B given A? Any of these. And any of those can be computed from the full joint. And much of what happens in the actual inference algorithms, there are 2 types, as you know. One is exact, one is sampling based. The exact ones try to actually compute the real exact probability. And what they try to do is they can do it this way, basically first compute the full joint and then from there compute any probability you want. But that winds up being too costly. As I pointed out, sometimes there are some probabilities that can be almost not read off the table. Why do it this way? So what the inference algorithms do, efficient ones, is to avoid doing redundant work. In the worst case, they may have to deal with the full joint. But if the problem is actually, if the query is simple enough that it could almost have been read up from one of the tables or multiplying 2 entries or something, then you will do it that way. Okay. And basically, when we say given, that means I'm telling you that some evidence is present. This is the joint distribution. When I say A given B, that means I have observed B. I have observed B. What do you think is the posterior on A? You understand what I'm saying? You can also ask for P of A. Given this joint distribution, you can ask for P of A. what would it be? You add up all the rows where A is true, and that's P of A. By the way, that actually gets me to the second point, which is generally we are most interested in understanding that networks are really multiplication of distributions. You see what I'm saying? In general, probabilities become easy when they can be multiplied. Which is actually why it turns out that when we go into learning, what we'll wind up doing is to maximize a probability. Typically, the probability that you're trying to maximize would be some multiplicative expression. Rather than maximize the multiplicative expression, we maximize the log of the multiplicative expression. Why log? Because log converts multiplications into sums. You see what I'm saying? And log is also a monotonic function. So that while log of a function's maximum value is different from the function's maximum value, both of them become maximum at the same time. You get this? So if you're only trying to figure out where it becomes maximum, maximizing a log expression is the same as maximizing the original expression. In probabilities, you hate sums. You like multiplication because you do logs. And in fact, when we get to EM, we will find out that one of the reasons EM is painful is because it winds up having an addition in the middle. Okay, so we understand this part. The other part is oftentimes in trying to do computation of a probability, ultimately there are only three kinds of things. One is you multiply these tables. The other, it turns out, is eliminate a variable. Eliminating a variable, for example, if I wanted what is the probability of AB, then I need to eliminate C. How do I eliminate C? Given this table, I add up all the rows where C is true. And that would be, so basically C is being eliminated, sorry, all the rows where AB is true are A, so whatever is the configuration, AB is true, whatever is the value of C, it doesn't matter, so you eliminate it. Similarly, A true, B false, whatever is the value of C, you add up those numbers. So in general, variable elimination involves summing away over these factors. So for example, if you have P of AB here, and you want to compute P of B, you just need to eliminate A. To eliminate A, you essentially add up the two rows where B is true and the two other rows where B is false. And because you're eliminating A. When you're eliminating A, so how do, if I give you this as the joint distribution, how would I get P of A? I mean, so the distribution is P of A and not A, P of not A also, right? And so P of A, I'm sorry, I'm trying to look at P of B. P of B would be, these are the two rows where B is true, and so you add them up. It doesn't matter what the value of A is. So this one is called marginalization. This is basically summing in discrete case. In continuous case, this is the integration, which is where that joke about Bayesians feel marginalized when they're integrated comes from. Okay. So so you can understand all the operations in Bayes networks in terms of this factor algebra, where each of these factors are some sort of conditional probability tables. Do you guys get this now? Yes.
So all these representations still work in scenarios where the proposition can take more than 2 elements.
Yeah, completely. I just used, in fact, as I said, these general ideas work even when the propositions are continuous, in which case you do integration. Okay, so the only thing you will do is if you have A can take values V1, V2, V3, instead of writing A, you will say A and not A, you will say A equal to V1, A equal to V2, A equal to V3. It will be a bigger table. We just do Boolean mostly because we want to connect it back to logic. which was Boolean variables. That's all. Okay. Okay. Any other questions on that stuff? Basically, so that sort of should make you understand what was going on in some of the exact computations when they talk about multiplying matrices. When they're multiplying matrices, they're really multiplying, join multiplying them. Okay. So you guys remember the complexity of this stuff. I'm just going to go fast. Stop me if you had trouble with that in watching this. Okay, I'm assuming that you've seen this. So you should not, it should be a relief that probabilistic inference is not worse than NP-hard. You see what I'm saying? Because Boolean logic inference would be a special case of probabilistic inference. Boolean logic inference is already NP complete. In fact, it turns out that it is actually the probabilistic inference is what's called sharp P complete, which is considered to be generally slightly costlier than NP complete because it winds up counting. Remember, all these probabilities have to be counted and added up. So in general, it's about the same complexity. It's not much worse, which should come as a relief. The other thing is for logic, remember, we talked about general theorem proving is co-NP complete, but Hahn clause is polynomial. You guys remember Hahn clauses? What is a Hahn clause? Hahn clause is of the form A and B implies C. So if you convert it into a clausal form, it will have at most one positive literal, because this will become not of A and B or C, which is same as not A or not B or C, which is okay. Whereas if you consider something like A or C, that's not Hahn clause because A or C is already two positive literals. And we knew that if there are no Hahn, if it's all Hahn clauses, logical inference is polynomial. The equivalent, in general, I have more generalized version of it, and the equivalent for probabilistic reasoning is if your Bayes net is singly connected. That means there is only at most one path between any pair of nodes. At most one path between any pair of nodes. Then it turns out that the exact inference on such a Bayes network is polynomial. Okay, and not surprisingly, these kinds of Bayes networks are actually singly connected, right? Because it's just one is connected to the next connected. But this one, remember, we had a name for this. What is this guy? What kind of a Bayes network is this? Chain. It's a chain. What chain? It's either Bayes chain or Markov chain. Which rings better bell? What I'm saying? In probability, if you have to give names, it will be either Bayes something or Markov something. So you say it aloud and see which sounds better. That must be the one you heard. You never heard Bayes chain. It is Markov chain. Right? This one is a Markov chain. And the reason people are crazy about Markov chains are because Markov chains are polynomial. Just as the reason people like prologue kind of reasoning is because prologue is Hahn clauses. And so it's polynomial inference without the cut operator. Again, another example of blind man searching, the drunk man searching for lost keys under light. That's where the light is. You understand what I'm saying? Okay, so, and then what's, thankfully, even this network, which actually is our Perl network, that's also actually singly connected. And then we pointed out that one network, there are many networks that can be doubly connected, but one of the not singly connected, and one of those would be this cloudy sprinkler rain network. And there basically, there are two paths between cloudy and wet grass, because of which it becomes multiply connected. So that will be like essentially disjunctive clauses in logic. And so on this, the computation, the inference in the size of the input is exponential. On the other kind of ones, the inference is polynomial. And then there's this other point that if I'm given a network like this, I want to convert it into a singly connected network. I can do that by basically, for example, taking these two nodes, merging them, and make a super node. This would be called sprinklers plus rain node. This one was the sprinkler node, this one is the rain node. Now this big one is the sprinkler plus rain node. This is the graph, you guys know about how to merge vertices in graphs. Okay, you get this. Now the interesting thing about this is now this is already singly connected. So one question is you have to make sure that there is conservation of complexity in general. Just like in physics, there is conservation of energy. In computer science, there has to be conservation of complexity. If this was NP-complete, and after this becomes singly connected and it becomes polynomial, unless you did exponential work to go from here to here, you just basically got perpetual complexity engine, like perpetual motion machine. Do you understand what I'm saying? And you should be worried. And thankfully, you don't need to, because thankfully, it doesn't actually violate anything, because what happens is complexity is always in terms of the input size. When you combined those two nodes, this node now has much bigger CPT table. If you combined n variables, the CPT table for the super node will be 2 power n, right? So now all of a sudden the input is much bigger, and being polynomial in a much bigger, exponentially bigger input is the same as being exponential in a polynomially smaller input. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's basically the background on where the complexities come. And then you looked at exact and approximate inferences, and the zeroth idea, which is the minimum. This one and the sampling ideas you really have to understand. Okay, this one essentially is you should be able to, given a base network, you should be able to compute every joint entry table. It's a costly way, but you should be able to do that. And once you do that, you should be able to answer any probabilistic query. Right? That is the minimum you should do. That's a very costly way to do it, but you can do it at least. The second essentially is, can we do any better? It turns out there are a variety of ways in which exact inference can basically avoid doing redundant work. Okay, first actually converting everything into the joint and then looking for probabilities of that. And that's what we were discussing in this inference by enumeration. Inference by enumeration essentially says, suppose you are looking for the probability of B given J and M. The small letters mean J is true, M is true. Big letter means I want the distribution on that. I want probability B being true as well as B being false. Do you guys understand that? Okay, so this would be a two-sized matrix. That is not BJM, I'm sorry, BJM and not BJM, and some numbers. That's what I need. Okay, how would I do that? It turns out I can essentially write this PB given JM as basically using the idea of conditional distributions, that AP A given B is the same as PA and B by PB, right? So I am doing PB given J, PBJM by PJM. Again, the small letters are actual single numbers. Big letters mean you need to consider both B being true, B being false. Now here, this is where we do this. I mentioned this normalization trick earlier on. If you don't want to compute PJM separately, since you are anyway computing P of B given J and M, if you also compute P of not B given JM, then you don't need to compute P of JM, because that can be essentially seen as a normalizing factor and you can compute that normalizing factor. Because P of B given JM would be alpha times something, P of not B given JM will be alpha times something else, and these two numbers must add up to 1. So from which you can get alpha. Okay. So, so that's basically, and then this is BJM. And so now you want BJM, J is small and M is small, probability. And that means 2 things are missing of the 5 variables, E and A. So you need to sum over E and A, because you are marginalizing over those 2 guys. So that's what we did. We said, alpha times over sum over E, sum over A, P, B, E, A, J, M. With this, you can actually compute these numbers. Almost directly, you can just go back, and now the advantage, of course, is now P, B, A, J, M. This is a joint entry, and you know how to compute joint entries. You may already have computed the joint entries in the beginning itself. If not, you can remember that given the topology here, the joint entries will be of the form P of B times P of E times P of A given BE times P of J given A times P of M given A. Whatever I'm doing, if looks like magic, then you're kind of sunk, because it's quite late after 3-4 classes of Bayes networks. If you didn't understand what I said, then you missed the conditional independence. If you missed it, it's a good time to ask. Okay, and then so not only you could, if at this point I could have stopped if you in fact already had the joint distribution in front of you. If not, you can actually get the entries that you do need. That is a minimum work. It's less work than having the full joint distribution up front. You're only going to compute the entries that you need. That is the second best idea. That's the first order idea. The third order idea, which I actually won't go into, and I don't think I explained it that slowly in the lecture either, is this idea called variable elimination method, which essentially realizes that when you write it this way, with E and A up front, you can take the sums inside. Because if you're summing over, for example, if you're summing over A, right, these are the only things that depend on A. So you can put the sum here instead of in the very front. And then similarly, this one would be the one for which summing over the E. And this B doesn't even depend on any of them. By doing this, when you are summing, you can essentially avoid doing repeated work. You could, for example, have computed these entries stored somewhere, and you can just read them off next time. That's basically called memoization. And that reduces the cost. Right? You're doing less multiplications. That's basically the idea of variable elimination. Now, I did not, there's a lot of nice theory about variable elimination, but I didn't spend much time on that. And I'm not going to spend much time on this here either, because essentially for large scale networks, people mostly use sampling based approaches. There's beautiful theory for exact method, but really nobody uses exact methods. People use sampling based methods. And the thing about sampling based methods is it's actually very easy to program. Very hard to prove they are correct, but very easy to program. Sort of like reinforcement learning, temporal difference method, etc. They're so easy to program. But somebody has to have proved that doing that actually leads to optimal behavior. Okay, so the textbook actually not only gives the sampling based methods, but it also shows that this sampling based method in the limit is an unbiased estimator. That means it actually converges to the true probability that you're trying to compute. But we will assume that that will happen and then just tell you how to do it. And of the methods, the one that I want to actually walk you through again is the two ones are essentially rejection sampling and likelihood weighting. Okay. Let's see, that's the generation sampling. Okay. What is the rejection sampling? So if I am trying to compute in this particular case, actually, what are we computing here? Yeah, so if you're trying to compute the posterior on remaining variables given some evidence, okay, evidence basically means in this particular case, sprinkler has been seen to be true and wet grass has been seen to be true, has been seen, not made, but seen to be true. If that is the case, how do you sample from the network? The basic idea, first of all, I mean, you people looked at the sampling stuff, right? I mean, so we started from empty network sampling. Let me go back to that. The way I can sample from empty network essentially is I can start, if I want to sample from this network, an entire joint distribution, joint entry, then I'll go to Cloudy. I have a coin. The coin should come up heads 50% of the time, tails 50% of the time. Then I actually toss it. This is very, very important. You have to actually toss it. Okay, and then it will come heads or tails. If it comes heads, assume it's Cloudy is true in this entry. If it comes tails, assume Cloudy is false in this entry. Okay, it's active as if in fact it came true. Then Cloudy is true. At that point, I need to sample its children. I'll sample sprinkler. To sample sprinkler, I need to look at the distribution of sprinkler given Cloudy is true. Sprinkler given Cloudy is true is 0.10. That means I need to get a coin that comes up heads 0.1 probability, tails 0.9 probability. Okay. In every language, there are random number generators. Every programming language, there is random number generators. So essentially, you can ask it to generate a random number between 0 and 1. And if that random number is less than or equal to 0.1, then you will act as if it is heads. If that random number is greater than 0.1 to 1.0, then you'll assume it is tails. You guys get this? So you don't actually have to go into the middle of the program and start tossing the coin. There is, in fact, a way of doing this pseudo-random generators. So at that point, essentially, you now have sprinkler. So again, you would say, oh, it's 0.1, so you just make sprinkler false. No, you're not allowed to do that. You're supposed to actually simulate. So sometimes the sprinkler comes still, mostly sprinkler will come false, but sometimes it can come true. Okay, imagine it came true. Then so you had Cloudy, then sprinkler, then again, here you're doing imagining. Okay, but when you're actually drawing the sample, you're constructing the sample. Okay, and then here when you come to rain, similarly, rain Cloudy is true, rain given Cloudy is 0.8. So I basically toss the coin that, or I basically generate a random number between 0 and 1. And if it is between 0 and 0.8, I'll consider it heads. If not, I'll consider it tails. Okay. And then if it assume that it actually, with your luck, let's assume that it actually came tails. That means that I got Cloudy and the sprinkler is true and rain is false. At that point, I need to select wet grass. I need to sample wet grass. Now, the interesting thing you notice is I'm sampling in the topological or the causal order. Topological order, for the network. And if I do that, essentially, by the time I come to a node, all its parents would have already been sampled. And so you know what distribution to use to sample this guy. Do people get this? You see what I'm saying? So this idea of sampling from the network, if the first time you're hearing it, it looks strange. But essentially, given these numbers, these probabilities exist, you still actually can sample the probability distribution. And the advantage of probability theory is that when you are sampling from the distribution, asymptotically, you will get the true probabilities if you take enough samples. Okay, that looks like a dumb way of doing it for small problems, but that's the greatest way of doing it for the large problems. How many of you guys know of how to compute the value of pi by throwing a pin on top of a circle? You guys know this? Yeah, they're called Monte Carlo simulations. These are all Monte Carlo simulations, essentially. Sampling is a kind of a simulation, except the difference is here, you don't need to do the experiment in the real world. The big advantage is that you have been given the probabilities already. So you only have to simulate the probability using this pseudo random number generator. Ask it to generate a number and see if it is false below 0.8 or above 0.8. So that's why it's very effective. Whereas if you have to do this experiment in the real world, it can be arbitrarily costly. You see what I'm saying? This is the kind of the difference between reinforcement learning with simulation versus reinforcement learning with acting out in the world. If you have the model, you can simulate. This is your model for the network. So you can simulate using basically the pseudo random number generators. So anyway, if this is SNR, then by the time you get to the wet grass, then I need to sample wet grass, and I know which probability to know because I need to look for S being true or being false. And so that is the probability distribution I have to use. It's 0.90. That means in this particular case, I need to toss a coin, which comes heads 0.9, tails 0.1. So I then ask a random number generator to give me a random number, and then between 0 and 1, and see if it is less than 0.9, I assume heads has come. If it's greater than 0.9, I assume tails has come. Okay. Having done this, so imagine it came heads, then it would be, wet grass. So I have just currently sampled one entry like this. If I keep doing this, I will get more of these kinds of entries. And if I have all the entries, then if I wanted to know a joint, let's say what is the real probability of CSRW, then if I have generated 1 million of these samples, see how many of these samples are CSRW true. That number by million is the joint distribution. That's the probability. Right? In fact, when we talk about learning the Bayes network, we start from the entries and try to put the numbers in. That's next class. This class, we are given numbers, we are converting into joint distribution. Nobody really does this because this is just computing the full joint, because that's too unnecessarily costly. Oftentimes, what you typically want is a very specific probability of wet grass given sprinkler is true and cloudy is false, let's say. Do you understand what I'm saying? In that case, what do? You can essentially, if you have the full joint, you can look for all the entries where cloudy is true and sprinkler is true, cloudy is false. Total, that would be the number of entries in the denominator. And the numerator would be the number of entries where wet grass is true. That would be the wet grass given sprinkler and not cloudy. And 1 minus that would be the wet grass, not wet grass given sprinkler and not cloudy. Right? That is one way of doing it. If you're doing it this way, then essentially you're doing the zeroth order method I told you earlier, except using the network configuration. Except using sampling rather than exact method. But you could do it in a different way, which is you can just only generate samples that are consistent with the evidence. Right? Suppose I'm actually saying it has to be the case that cloudy is true and sprinkler is false according to the evidence. Cloudy is true and sprinkler is the false according to the evidence. Then if I'm trying to sample from this network, as soon as I start at the top and the cloudy becomes false, then you have to throw that sample out. Then maybe cloudy is true and you come down, sprinkler becomes true. Then you have to throw the sample out. Imagine a scenario where you have a network. There is evidence here. This has to be true and this has to be false. And this one is much lower down, topologically speaking. So you spent a whole bunch of time making the entire sample, came to this node, you sampled it, it came true. You have to throw the sample out. You guys are saying this is what's called rejection sampling. It works, but it's wasteful. You guys get that? So a beautiful idea called likelihood weighting essentially avoids this problem. And it avoids this problem in what looks like somewhat questionable means. So rejection sampling essentially, if a sample, even a partial sample is already inconsistent with the evidence, you throw it away. And so if in fact the evidence is high up in the network, you're more likely to know whether or not the sample you are generating is consistent. If you're unlucky and the evidence is one at the high and many at the low, very low level in the network in the sense of causal direction, then you will compute the entire sample and last minute throw it away. See what I'm saying? So that's what rejection sampling does. Rejection sampling is still better than full joint based reasoning, because full joint based reasoning actually generates the entire joint. Likelihood weighting is a much nicer idea. And what it does is it essentially clamps the variables that you have evidence for at their values. Okay, and it doesn't sample them anymore. Instead, it changes the weight of the sample. This is a thing that you have to understand. So previously when we looked at this, right? This is one sample. This is weight is 1. And then maybe if I do one more sample, I'm sorry, this is one sample. And then I might get another sample that might be C, S, R, not W, another sample not C, S, not R, W, etc. Each of them are one sample each. So if you're trying to compute some particular probability, then you just count all the samples where the evidence is true, put that in the denominator, and all the samples where what you're asking for is true and put it in the numerator and you get the number. And you're adding basically integers because each sample is a full sample. In the likelihood weighting, what you do is that since I have required that sprinkler be true no matter what, then I will say that suppose I came here, suppose I started here and I sampled cloudy and cloudy came true. That means I have partial sample cloudy true. Then I come to sprinkler, I won't sample sprinkler because sprinkler is part of evidence. It has to be true for me. But then I will check if cloudy is true, what is the probability of sprinkler being true? It's 0.1. So I will say this sample I was constructing, previously it had started with having weight 1. Now it gets multiplied by 0.1. Do you see what I'm saying? So now you start having fractional samples. But zero samples are much worse than fractional samples. You guys understand that? Because in the rejection sampling, if in fact sprinkler were to come false, you just have to throw away the sample. Here I'm saying I'll just keep sprinkler to be true because that's what I need. And then make the sample's weight be multiplied by the actual probability of sprinkler being true, given upstream cloudy came true. So that's just 0.1. And then I come down here, right, for the wet grass too. And then similarly, then I come, suppose I sampled rain. Now this one and this one are actual evidences. This one is normal. It's a normal node. That means you're trying to compute its distribution. So rain, I will have to sample. Imagine if cloudy is true, rain has to be sampled by tossing a coin, which comes heads 0.8. Okay. And suppose I actually sampled it and it came true. That means rain is true. So now the interesting thing is I need to sample wet grass, except I won't sample wet grass. Wet grass is part of the evidence. You guys see that? Wet grass is part of the evidence. So instead, I will keep wet grass to be true and then see what is, so if in fact rain is true and sprinkler is true, rain is true and sprinkler is true, wet grass would have been true with 0.99 probability. So I multiply my weight with 0.99. So when I develop the full sample, I multiply the incremental weights. That would be the weight of the sample. This is a great idea. In fact, you will see a variation of this when you do expectation maximization. Okay, but essentially this allows you not to lose all the work. At least you have saved some part because now you have a fractional sample. It's not a whole sample, but that counts for like 0.1. This is your partial credit, right? I mean, you write the answer wrong, but you say, look, I wrote a full page. Give me some money, some points, right? This is your partial credit. And the interesting question is when you're doing partial credit, it's not clear whether in fact this is supposed to it's guaranteed to actually converge to the right probability. That's where if you are into probability theory a little bit more, then you should look at the textbook. It has a nice proof about why weighting actually converges. Yes.
Is the weight always 1 or is it externally given?
What? No, in the beginning, the weight is 1 because cloudy is not part of the evidence. But any variable that you are about to sample, the weight starts with being 1.
It always starts with 1.
Yeah, it starts with 1, and every variable you start sampling, if it is an non-evidence variable, it just multiplies by 1. If it is evidence variable, then it multiplies. You don't actually sample it. Instead, you multiply it by the probability that the evidence will take that value, given that the parents have already taken the values that they have. Yes.
So this is my understanding. Sampling is just like a way to save work, right? Instead of having to multiply everything out. But what if you clamp everything? Like you clamp all 4 nodes here, or if you just multiply?
Well, no, the point is you're trying to actually compute. In doing this, what you're trying to compute peak cloudy rain given sprinkler and wet grass. You understand what I'm saying? So if you clamp everything, that means you're essentially computing a single joint entry. And that will work too. This is the way of essentially acting as if you only want to generate, actually, no, it doesn't work. Evidence essentially means that has been observed to be true. Okay, so here you're saying, I observed sprinkler to be true, wet gas to be true. What is the distribution over C and R, or just C, or just R? And these samples that you compute will get you that. Again, it's almost like, you guys have done AVL trees in 310. It looks like 3 pages of code, an algorithm to understand whether or not it's right or wrong. All sampling based algorithms are extremely cheap to understand. The trick is, why do they even work? But unfortunately, or actually fortunately for us, sampling based ones are the ones that are used on large scale simulations, large scale networks. The exact one is just to convince ourselves that we know how to do exact. Okay. So that's rejection sampling. In fact, there is one other one. I don't know whether I have time because I have only 15 minutes left, but maybe I'll point that out too. The other one, essentially, there's one more sampling. There are lots of sampling based algorithms. Likelihood weighting is at least something that you need to understand. Okay. The other one actually is Markov chain Monte Carlo, MCMC. In fact, that's one of like the top sampling algorithms that is used. In fact, it has both. First of all, you had the word Monte Carlo and you have the Markov chain. Okay, so how can it be bad? And the funny thing about that is it essentially establishes a Markov chain over the entire network's configurations. That means, so for example, anytime a node is red, that means it is false. Anytime the node is green, that means it is true. Anytime it is green and green or red and shaded, that means it's evidence. That means you don't get to sample it. So if in fact sprinkler and wet grass have to be true, the only other things that can change are those other 2 variables. That means there are really 4 states left. You understand what I'm saying? So these are the 4 states of the network. This is 1 state, this is 2nd state, this is 3rd state, this is 4th state. And in essence, what you need to do is so if you are in this state, and you pick a node and sample it, then either you stay in this state or you go to a different state where this node's value changes. Right? And you keep doing this, so you are playing around, going around the Markov chain. If you do it enough number of times, after a while, Markov chains, this is stuff that if you have done Markov chains and remember, the good Markov chains wind up having steady state distribution. So after a while, the distribution converges. So at that point, you just take 100 samples. That means 100 network configurations, and see how many of those samples have what you want, and put that in the numerator and the number in the other than the number in the numerator. So for example, in the end, you visit like 100 states, 31 have rain true, 69 have rain false, then 31 by 100 is your probability for rain, according to this Markov chain. Okay. The only question which I haven't explained to you is how do I sample something like rain in this network? I just want to sample only rain in the network. And the interesting thing is, it turns out that you can sample, there's a cheaper way instead of just going the entire sample construction where you start from the top and go to the bottom, which is what we did in the previously. If you just want to sample one node in a Bayes network, then this picture becomes important. So you guys understand this part, right? That a node X is independent of its ancestors and its non-descendants given its immediate parents. This is basically what you used in actually writing those joint entries as multiplications. This you understood. It turns out that the other thing that also follows, and as to why it follows will become clearer when we talk about DCEP condition later, is that a node, so this node is independent of its ancestors and its non-descendants given its parents. So parents sort of keep it safe from the evil influence of ancestors and non-descendants. But if you really want to have a full-on secure blanket, and that's why, do you guys understand? Do you guys see what that is? By the way, Linus with his security blanket. Okay, if you want a security blanket for your base network, a node, then this is what's called a Markov blanket. A Markov blanket of a node, a Markov blanket of this node X is its immediate parents, its immediate descendants, and the parents of its descendants. This is modern family. The previous one is traditional values family. This is the modern family. You see what I'm saying? So you have, I mean, when you get together for Thanksgiving, then you get to have your kids, but then your kids have maybe other parents, you have to bring them too. It's a much bigger gathering. But then if you're all inside, then you are, the kids, you are essentially secure from the evil influences of the rest of the network. Do you understand what I'm saying? So why is this important? If I want to sample just X without knowing anything, then I can always sample X given the network is the same as sampling X given its Markov blanket. Do you get that? You remember that given, sampling X given U1 and let's say its parent J1 is the same as sampling it given just U1. Because U1 mitigates it basically stops the influence of the ancestor from hitting this node. If you want to consider the entire network, then you can sample a node by taking its entire Markov blanket. Notice that the Markov blanket will still be smaller than the entire network because it will just be the immediate parents, immediate children, immediate children's immediate parents again. There's no transitivity after that. You don't call, your children's parents to the Thanksgiving. The modern family stops there apparently, right? So this is Markov blanket. Why is this important? This is basically what Markov chain Monte Carlo is doing. When I said basically in this particular case, if I'm trying to look at rain, what is rain's Markov blanket? Rain's Markov blanket is its immediate parent cloudy, its immediate child wet grass, and its immediate parent sprinkler. So this is a sad network where essentially the Markov blanket is the rest of the network. It's not a very good example, but you see what I'm saying. If this is a much bigger network with more other variables, but you still only need to look at this. And it turns out that you can sample a node given its Markov blanket quite easily. That means you can compute, remember, to sample a network, sample a node, given evidence, I need to know what is the probability that the node would be true given the evidence. And then I will toss that coin with that probability. Right? So what happened is I take P of xi given Markov blanket of xi is P of xi given parents times P of gj given parents. It turns out this can be shown just from the base network. And so this will tell you how to compute this probability. And the moment you did the probability, you can toss the coin. And that's how you go happily around this network. around this network where, so the Markov chain for the Bayes network is a meta chain. The states in the Markov chain are the full-on Bayes network configurations. You understand what I'm saying? So in fact, in the worst case, if you don't have any evidence, and if you have n variables, then the Markov chain will have how many states? 2 power n states. The more evidence, the smaller the network. This is actually one of the most popular ways of sampling. It's even better than likelihood weighting. And in doing so, you learned another thing cute, which is Linus and his security blanket. Right? The Markov blanket is something that you should understand. Now, having said that, what I want to do in the next couple of minutes is start talking a little about the independence assertions, and I guess I have to complete it next class. In general, this looked like kind of magic that somehow this is one type of independence. That means a node is independent of its ancestors and non-descendants given parents. This is other type. A node is independent of everybody else given its Markov blanket. What I really want to do is to be able to answer arbitrary questions of the type. Where am I? Yeah, questions of the type. Is a set of nodes X independent of a set of nodes Y given another set of nodes Z? That's what I want to answer. Because in essence, a Bayes network is a set of conditional independence assertions. So the question is, can you say, given the topology of the network, can you say what independences actually hold? It turns out that it's not required in much of the theory. In fact, we were talking about it, the TS, and I was talking about the fact that you could have done, I think that's why some of you people are pretty bitter about this. You could have done the projects without actually attending the class. Right? Because essentially you just do the project. You don't know why the project is working, but you just basically follow the things and so on. So it turns out that if somebody else has implemented the Bayes network inference, you don't need to understand what independences actually hold. But the people who come up with the algorithms for Bayes network inference need to understand what independences hold and what don't. In particular, in fact, just now we pointed out this couldn't have been done without knowing what independences hold. So in general, we want to be able to answer this question of what independences hold given a set of nodes X. Is it independent of another set of nodes Y given a set of nodes Z as the evidence? Right? You know how to answer some of those questions already. For example, like you know that X is independent of J given U. You know that, right? So I just want to be able to do this generally. And the general criterion is called DCEP. I won't be able to get into that yet today, but I want to get you started thinking about it by thinking about the fact that ultimately all Bayes networks only have 3 types of junctions. Only 3 types of junctions. It's beautiful. The 3 types of junctions are causal chain, A arrow B arrow C. And imagine that the Bayes network is written in the causal direction. Okay, but even otherwise, these independences hold. So causal chain essentially A, arrow B arrow C is of the type fire causes smoke, which causes alarm. Okay. Now, in that particular case, A would be independent of C given B. Right? Because fire is independent of alarm given smoke. If I told you smoke is occurring, then you can tell alarm's probability without caring about whether actually fire is there or not. Agreed. So in this case, this is the conditional independence that holds. The other type of chain is common cause, which is B causes both A and C. B causes both A and C. For example, age of child causes both shoe size and reading ability. And if you don't know this, you will notice that, oh my God, kids with big shoe sizes seem to be reading well. So the way to improve education in this country is to get kids to have bigger shoes, right? Because reading ability is correlated with shoe size. Well, the reason that you're missing is there is a common cause, which is age, which is causing both of them, because of which they wound up being correlated. In this case, what happens is A, again, is independent of C given B. That means shoe size and reading ability are actually independent if you know the age. Without it, they get correlated. Right? If you arbitrarily go into a school, not a single classroom, but an entire school, and you look at kids' shoe size and their reading ability, it will be loosely correlated because the big kids with big shoes will be reading well, unless they're bozos. Right? So probabilistically speaking, the world is not full of bozos. There are some non-bozos. And so, in fact, it will be correlated with the shoe size. But if you go into a single classroom where everybody of a single age, assume, then there is no actual correlation between shoe size and reading ability. The third one, which is the one we'll end with, is actually the most beautiful one, which is the collider, common effect. This is the one I was talking about. You know, you don't need, if the alarm went off and you know burglary occurred, you think earthquake didn't occur. Because the need for earthquake also occurring is reduced because alarm already, burglary already occurred. So this is called collider, which is both A and C are causing B. If both A and C are causing B, then you tend to, here is in these two cases, you know conditional independences hold. In this case, with the evidence, independence disappears. They actually become dependent. So, and this is a beautiful example. You guys, and by the way, this is from Pearl, has a, Yuda Pearl, who basically came up with Bayes network, has a name, as a book called Book of Why. It's actually great to read. It's between like a textbook and, you know, like it's meant for educated readers. It's like, you know, Stephen Hawking writing about physics for people like us. Right? It's unfortunately that bad. But anyway, it's kind of quite nice. So, you know, these are examples from his, but so here is the example. Celebrity can be caused either by talent or by beauty. Very beautiful people are, you know, kind of celebrities. Very talented people are celebrities. So if you see a talented person who, I'm sorry, a celebrity who looks ugly, then you assume they must really be talented. And vice versa. Many people who look at Brad Pitt think he must be pretty bad in acting. Because why does he need to act? He looks good. You see what I'm saying? Again, that's the collider. You assume that the other thing is no longer needed because one thing explains. And in this case, in the general population, talent and beauty are independent in the general population. But if you know they are celebrities, talent and beauty become dependent. So, just before you leave, and I'll just say this and I'll repeat it next time, that the way you try to see whether X is independent of Y given Z is if every path from X to Z, I mean X to Y, is going through Z, and that path is a common cause or a chain. And it's not a common effect. That means the common effect, the Z should not be given as evidence. The common cause and chain, the Z can be given as evidence. That's what the deseparation condition is. I'll talk about it again when we come back next. William.
And now I'm effectively running a third shift schedule. I'm like, yeah, I'll go to bed at 6, and I'll wake up at like 1. That way we would. I woke up this morning, and I'm like, you know what? I want to do my brilliant. I feel like I was 9. Oh.